All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We've got a really cool topic lined up today, and I am personally very excited to dig into it.
Yeah, me too. Today we are talking sleep, but not just sleep in general. We are really going to be focusing on your sleep.
To your personal sleep. What makes your sleep yours?
Exactly. We are going to try to understand why your sleep needs and patterns are unique to you.
So think of this as a guide to understanding your own rest. And like we always do on the deep dive, we've done a bunch of research on this topic for you. And today we're going to be drawing from one particular conversation that really stood out to us. A discussion with Dr. Matthew Walker, a leading sleep scientist on the Huberman Lab podcast.
Yeah, I love that conversation. Dr. Walker has so many great insights. And one of the things that he really emphasized was that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to sleep.
Right.
What's good sleep for one person might be totally different for someone else.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard all this generic sleep advice before, right? Like you need 8 hours or whatever. But have you ever stopped to think about what a good night's sleep actually means for you?
Right. Like maybe 8 hours isn't the magic number for you. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. And it's not just about the quantity either.
Totally. We'll be getting into all of that. But let's start with the basics, the fundamentals of sleep itself, kind of to set the stage.
Okay, let's do it.
So Dr. Walker broke down sleep into two main categories. The first one is non-rapid eye movement sleep, or non-REM for short. But non-REM sleep is further broken down into four stages. Stage 1, Stage 2, Stage 3, Stage 4.
Yep. Stages 1 and 2 are what we consider light sleep.
Yep.
But stages 3 and 4, now that's when you're getting into deep sleep. This deep restorative sleep that your body and brain really crave. It's like the most profound level of sleep you can experience.
Interesting. Okay. Then we have the second type of sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep, or REM.
REM sleep. Yeah, and this is the one that gets its name from those rapid eye movements that you make under your eyelids.
And it's funny, I was always told that you dream during REM.
Yeah, I mean, REM sleep is definitely strongly associated with vivid dreaming. But, recent research has suggested that some level of mental activity can actually occur in almost all sleep stages.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
So we're kind of dreaming all night long.
in a way. Yeah, it's not always those vivid narrative dreams that we remember,
Yeah.
but there's definitely some mental processing happening.
Interesting. Okay. So we've got these two types of sleep,
Hmm.
non-REM and REM, and throughout the night, they actually cycle back and forth.
Right. For the average adult, a full sleep cycle, so going from non-REM to REM and back, takes about 90 minutes.
90 minutes. Wow.
Yep. So you drift off, you move through those lighter non-REM stages, you get down into that deep non-REM sleep, then you come back up into a period of REM sleep, and then that whole process repeats multiple times throughout the night.
That's fascinating. So I guess that means that if I sleep for 8 hours, then I'm cycling through these stages 5, 6 times during the night.
Yeah, something like that.
Wow. Okay, so how does this all tie back to the idea that our sleep needs are unique?
Well, one of the things that Dr. Walker pointed out is that the proportion of non-REM to REM within that 90-minute cycle actually changes throughout the night.
What does that mean?
So in the first half of your night, deep non-REM sleep tends to dominate.
So most of those first few hours of sleep, I'm mostly in deep sleep.
Yeah.
Got it.
But then as the night goes on, the balance shifts. And in the second half, you typically spend more time in REM sleep and less time in that deep sleep.
Okay, so what's the takeaway there?
Well, if you're constantly cutting your sleep short in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
even by just an hour or two, you might be missing out on a disproportionate amount of REM sleep.
And how much would that be?
Dr. Walker said it could be as much as 60 to 80% of your total REM sleep.
Oh, wow. That's huge.
Yeah, so it's not just about the total number of hours you sleep. It's also about getting a full sleep opportunity to cycle through all the stages.
That makes sense. So what about that 90-minute cycle? Is that set in stone? Like, do I have to sleep in 90-minute increments to get good sleep?
That's a common misconception. But Dr. Walker emphasized that the 90-minute cycle is really just an average.
Okay.
Your actual sleep cycle length can vary, from night to night,
Mm-hmm.
and it can be anywhere from 75 minutes to 120 minutes.
So I could have a 75-minute cycle one night, a 120-minute cycle the next night.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's a lot of variation between individuals, but for a given individual, their sleep cycle length tends to be pretty consistent.
Like my own sleep cycle length is probably pretty stable from night to night.
Right. He made an analogy to a woman's menstrual cycle.
Okay.
The length of a woman's cycle can be very different from another woman's cycle.
Right.
But for each individual woman, it's usually pretty consistent from month to month.
Yeah, that's true.
And the same goes for sleep cycles.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting to see how sleep is already pretty unique.
Right.
Like my sleep cycle length might be different from yours.
Exactly. And there's another interesting factor that Dr. Walker mentioned, sex differences.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
Well, on average, men tend to have sleep cycles that are about 15 to 20 minutes longer than women's cycles.
Oh, wow. So if we're working with that 90-minute average, that's actually a significant difference.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So knowing that our sleep cycles can vary so much from person to person, this kind of debunks that whole wake up at the end of a 90-minute cycle myth, right?
Yeah, it does. There's this idea floating around, especially online, that you have to wake up precisely at the end of a 90-minute cycle, even if it means getting less sleep overall.
Right, because otherwise you're going to wake up in the middle of a cycle and feel groggy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but Dr.
Okay.
Walker was pretty clear that that's just not true.
Okay.
He said the most important thing is to get as much sleep as you need. Don't cut your sleep short just because you think you have to wake up at the end of some arbitrary cycle.
So more sleep trumps that 90-minute rule.
Absolutely.
Okay, I like that. What about if I wake up in the middle of the night, but I still feel like I could go back to sleep? Should I try to?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Dr. Walker said that in general, if you wake up and you feel like you can go back to sleep, you should definitely try. More sleep is usually better.
Okay.
But he did add one important caveat.
Okay.
If you lie awake in bed for more than about 25 minutes and you just can't fall back asleep, then it might be better to get out of bed.
Why is that?
Because if you spend too much time in bed awake, you can start to associate your bed with being awake instead of being asleep.
So you start to develop this conditioned response. I'm in bed, I'm awake.
Exactly. And that can actually make it harder to fall asleep in the future.
Okay, that makes sense. I actually struggle with that a lot. I feel like my bed has become this, battleground for sleep.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
And actually, that's one of the main things that cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, tries to address.
Oh, really?
Yeah. CBTI teaches you strategies to strengthen the association between your bed and sleep.
So instead of getting out of bed after 25 minutes, what should I do?
Well, Dr. Walker suggested that if you find yourself lying awake for a while, you should get out of bed and go to another room.
Yeah.
Do something relaxing like read a book or listen to some calming music.
Or maybe even listen to the deep dive.
Exactly. And then when you start to feel sleepy again, you can go back to bed.
That makes sense. It's about breaking that negative association with the bed.
Right.
Okay, cool. So we've been talking about these different stages of sleep, but I'm curious, what actually happens during each stage?
Okay. Well, let's start with stage 1 non-REM, which is that light sleep.
Okay.
Dr. Walker described it as kind of the shallows of sleep. And one of the characteristic signs of this stage is those slow rolling eye movements that you make under your eyelids.
Oh, yeah.
And it's also the stage where you might experience those hypnagogic jerks.
Those are the things that make you feel like you're falling, right?
Exactly. Those sudden involuntary muscle spasms.
Yeah. I hate those.
Yeah, a lot of people do. And fun fact, your proprioception, which is basically your awareness of your body's position in space, starts to degrade in this stage.
So that's probably why those hypnagogic jerks happen.
Yeah. It's like your brain is losing track of where your body is, and then it kind of freaks out a little bit.
That's funny.
And another interesting thing about stage 1 is that you might also experience what Dr. Walker calls mini dreams or dreamlets.
What are those?
They're just these fleeting, almost dreamlike thoughts or images that can pop into your head.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So what happens in stage 2 non-REM sleep?
So in stage 2, one of the main characteristics is what we call sleep spindles.
Okay.
And these look like these short bursts of electrical brain activity, kind of like little blips on an EEG.
Okay.
They last just a second or two. And they have this frequency of about 12 to 15 hertz.
12 to 15 hertz. Okay. What does that even mean?
Well, hertz is a unit of frequency.
Okay.
So 12 to 15 hertz means that these brain waves are oscillating, going up and down 12 to 15 times per second.
Okay, so it's like a rhythm in the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that these sleep spindles are happening against this background of much slower brainwave activity.
How much slower?
So around 4 to 8 hertz.
Okay, so it's like you've got this slower rhythm going on and then these little bursts of faster activity on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a more complex rhythm now.
Interesting. Okay. So then what happens in stages 3 and 4 non-REM sleep, which is, that deep sleep that you were talking about before?
Yeah. So in deep sleep, there's this really dramatic shift in brain activity to what we call delta waves.
Delta waves. Okay.
And delta waves are super slow, super large, powerful brainwaves,
Okay.
and their frequency is anywhere from zero point 0.5 to 4 hertz.
Wow. Okay. So that is way slower than the other stages.
Yeah, it's like the brain is really slowing down. And what's even more remarkable is that during deep sleep, hundreds of thousands of neurons in the cortex, all across the brain, they start firing together in sync.
Wow. So it's like all these different parts of the brain are communicating with each other in this really coordinated way.
Exactly. Dr. Walker compared it to a crowd in a football stadium, all chanting together in unison,
Okay.
and then falling silent, and then chanting again, and then falling silent.
Wow. That's a really powerful image.
It is. It really highlights the fact that deep sleep is this incredibly unique and important brain state.
Yeah. So what is this deep sleep state actually doing for us?
Well, Dr. Walker really emphasized that each sleep stage has its own specific and vital functions.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily a good thing to just try to get more of one stage,
Mhm.
like deep sleep or REM.
Ok-
We need all of them.
Okay. But he did say some interesting things about the specific functions of deep sleep.
Yeah. So first of all, deep sleep is when a lot of memory consolidation happens.
Oh.
So that's the process of transferring information from short-term memory to long-term memory. And it's also involved in making those memories more resistant to forgetting.
Wow. So if I want to remember what I'm learning, I need to get enough deep sleep.
You got it. Deep sleep is also super important for your immune system.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It basically helps to restore and rearm your immune cells so they can fight off infections and other threats.
Interesting.
And another really important function of deep sleep is metabolic regulation.
Okay. What is that?
So metabolic regulation is all about how your body manages things like blood sugar levels and insulin sensitivity.
Okay.
And research has actually shown that if you specifically reduce deep sleep, it can really mess up your metabolic health.
Really?
Yeah, your body's ability to release insulin is impaired, your cells become less sensitive to insulin, and some studies have shown that this can actually lead to a pre-diabetic state within just a few days.
Wow. Okay. So deep sleep is really crucial for maintaining our energy balance.
Exactly. It's not just about feeling rested, it's about keeping your body running smoothly.
Okay.
And then the final key function of deep sleep that Dr. Walker mentioned was brain cleansing.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that. What is it exactly?
So during deep sleep, the glymphatic system, which is basically the brain's waste removal system, becomes much more active.
Okay.
And it helps to clear out all those toxic proteins that build up in your brain during wakefulness.
Okay.
Things like beta amyloid and tau protein, which have been linked to Alzheimer's disease.
So if we don't get enough deep sleep, those toxic proteins can build up and potentially lead to problems down the line.
Right. So you could really think of deep sleep as a nightly detox for your brain.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so we've covered stages 1 through 4 of non-REM sleep. Now, what about REM sleep? What's happening in our brains during that stage?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the defining feature of REM sleep is those rapid eye movements. And brain activity during REM sleep is actually much more similar to wakefulness than it is to those deep stages of non-REM sleep.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah. And as we said, REM sleep is when we tend to have those really vivid dreams.
Yeah, the ones we actually remember.
Exactly. And another interesting thing about REM sleep is that our muscles become basically paralyzed.
Oh, so that's why I don't act out our dreams.
Exactly. Your brain is basically putting the brakes on your muscles to prevent you from moving around and potentially hurting yourself.
That's a good thing.
It is.
Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of what happens during these different stages of sleep, I'm curious, does our sleep position matter? Like, does it affect how well we sleep?
Yeah, it's a good question. And Dr. Walker said that there are definitely some things to consider when it comes to sleep position.
Okay.
So first of all, lying down in general helps your body dissipate heat, which is important for falling asleep and staying asleep.
Correct.
Yeah. To fall asleep, your brain and body temperature actually need to drop slightly. And it's easier for your body to do that when you're lying down.
That's why it's always harder to fall asleep when it's too hot.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What else did Dr. Walker say about sleep position?
Well, he talked about snoring and sleep apnea.
Okay.
And for people who have those conditions, sleeping on your back can sometimes make things worse.
Really? Why is that?
Because when you're on your back, gravity can pull your tongue back and obstruct your airway.
Oh, okay.
So if you snore or have mild sleep apnea, Dr. Walker recommended trying to train yourself to sleep on your side.
And how do you do that?
Well, he mentioned this old trick, the tennis ball in the t-shirt pocket method.
What is that?
So you basically wear a tight t-shirt backwards with a tennis ball in the back pocket.
Okay.
And if you roll onto your back during the night, the discomfort of the tennis ball will hopefully prompt you to turn back onto your side.
Oh, that's clever. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's a little bit old school, but it can be effective.
Cool. So is there a best sleep position for brain health?
There was some interesting research that Dr. Walker mentioned.
Yep.
Some animal studies have suggested that side sleeping might be better for brain cleansing than sleeping on your back or your stomach.
Really? Why is that?
Well, apparently if you watch animals sleep in their natural environments, many of them tend to rest with their heads turned to the side.
That's interesting. So maybe that's a natural position that helps with waste removal in the brain.
Yeah, maybe. But Dr. Walker was careful to point out that there's not strong evidence yet in humans.
Okay.
It's an area that definitely needs more research.
Okay, so the jury's still out on that one.
Right.
Okay. Let's move on to something that I think everyone can relate to. Yawning.
Oh, yeah, we all do it.
Why do we yawn? Is it just because we're tired?
That's what a lot of people think.
Mm-hmm.
But Dr. Walker actually talked about 4 different hypotheses for why we yawn.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first one is the tiredness hypothesis, which basically says that we yawn because we're sleepy.
Mm.
But this has actually been largely debunked. People often yawn when they're bored, but not sleepy.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're sleepy, but don't yawn.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, what's the second hypothesis?
So the second one is that yawning helps to rebalance the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our blood.
Okay.
But this one also doesn't really hold up.
How come?
Because studies have shown that if you artificially change the levels of oxygen or carbon dioxide in people's blood, it doesn't actually affect how much they yawn.
Interesting. Okay, what about the third hypothesis?
So this one is the brain cooling hypothesis.
Okay.
And this one is gaining more and more traction. The idea is that the deep inhalation that we take during a yawn helps to cool down the brain.
So it's like a way to regulate brain temperature.
Exactly. And there's some pretty good evidence for this. For example, people tend to yawn more when it's hot outside.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I definitely yawn more in the summer.
And yawning also decreases if you apply a cold pack to someone's forehead.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it seems like there's a connection between brain temperature and yawning.
Makes sense. Okay, what's the last hypothesis?
So the fourth one is that yawning might have a social signaling function.
What does that mean?
Well, you know how yawning can be contagious.
Oh, yeah. Like if I see someone yawn, I almost always yawn too.
Right. So the idea is that yawning might be a way for us to communicate with each other, maybe to signal boredom or empathy, or even just to synchronize our behavior.
That's fascinating. I know, so it seems like the brain cooling hypothesis is the most likely explanation for why we yawn.
Yeah, it's definitely the leading contender right now.
Okay, cool. So, we've been talking a lot about the different stages of sleep and the factors that affect our sleep. But now I want to get to the big question. What actually constitutes a good night's sleep?
Yeah.
Because, we always hear that we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep, but it's clearly more complicated than that.
Right. And Dr. Walker really pushed back on the idea that it's just about the number of hours.
Okay.
He said that we need to think about sleep in terms of 4 key elements. He called them the 4 macros of sleep.
The 4 macros of sleep. Okay, I like that. What are they?
So it's an easy acronym to remember, QQRT.
QQRT. Yeah.
Quantity, quality, regularity, and timing.
Okay, so it's not just about how much we sleep. It's also about how well we sleep, how consistent our sleep is, and when we sleep.
Exactly. And all of these factors are important for determining how restful and restorative our sleep actually is.
Okay, let's break down each of those snickers a little bit more. So quantity, we've talked about this already, but the general recommendation is 7 to 9 hours for most adults.
Right. That's kind of the sweet spot for most people, but of course, individual needs can vary.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, what about quality? How do we know if we're getting good quality sleep?
So Dr. Walker highlighted 2 main things to look for.
Okay.
The first is continuity, which basically means how often you wake up during the night. If you're constantly waking up, that's a sign that your sleep is fragmented and the quality is probably not great.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there's actually a way to measure this.
Okay.
It's called sleep efficiency.
Sleep efficiency. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically the percentage of time that you spend asleep while you're in bed.
Okay.
So if you're in bed for 8 hours and you sleep for 7 of those hours, your sleep efficiency would be 87.5%.
Okay, got it. And what's considered a good sleep efficiency?
Dr. Walker said that 85% or higher is generally considered good.
Okay, so if I'm waking up a lot during the night, my sleep efficiency is probably going to be lower than 85%.
Right.
Okay. So that's continuity. What's the other thing that affects sleep quality?
So the other thing is the electrical quality of deep sleep.
Okay.
And this refers to the strength and power of those delta brainwaves that we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this is not something that you can easily track with those wearable sleep trackers.
Oh.
Yeah. It requires more sophisticated equipment.
So I can't just rely on my Fitbit to tell me if I'm getting good quality deep sleep.
Right.
Okay. Got it. So we've talked about quantity and quality. Now what about regularity?
Okay, so regularity is all about how consistent your bedtime and wake-up times are.
Okay.
And ideally, you want to keep them within a 30-minute window each day.
So even on the weekends?
Ideally, yes.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah, I know. It can be tough.
It is tough. But why is regularity so important?
Well, the research on this is actually pretty remarkable.
Okay.
Dr. Walker mentioned a large study from the UK Biobank that looked at over 60,000 people.
60,000 people. Wow, that's a huge study.
Yeah, it's a massive study. And they found that the people who had the most regular sleep patterns actually had a 49% lower risk of dying from any cause compared to the people who had the least regular sleep patterns.
Wow. That's a really significant reduction in mortality.
It is. And they also found a 35% reduction in cancer mortality
Wow.
and
Okay.
an almost 60% reduction in cardiovascular mortality.
So regularity is not just about feeling good. It's about living longer.
It really seems to be.
That's incredible.
And what's even more amazing is that the impact of regularity on mortality was almost twice as strong as the impact of sleep duration.
Really?
Yeah. So how consistent you are with your sleep schedule seems to matter even more than how many hours you sleep each night.
Wow. Okay, so quantity, quality, regularity. Now we're on to the last macro, timing.
Right. And timing is all about aligning your sleep schedule with your individual chronotype.
Okay. Reminder for anyone who's forgotten. Chronotype is basically whether you're a morning person, a night owl, or somewhere in between.
Exactly. And your chronotype influences the natural rhythm of your circadian clock.
Okay.
So if you try to force yourself to sleep and wake up at times that are out of sync with your natural rhythm, it can really mess up your sleep.
So like if I'm a night owl and I try to go to bed early, I'm probably not going to fall asleep easily.
Exactly. And even if you do manage to fall asleep, the quality of your sleep might suffer.
Okay, that makes sense. So these four macros of sleep, quantity, quality, regularity, and timing are all important for determining how well we sleep.
They are.
And they all contribute to the fact that sleep is a really individual experience.
Absolutely.
So knowing all of this, how do we actually know if we're getting enough sleep?
Well, Dr. Walker shared a few practical tips for figuring that out.
Okay.
He said that one of the best ways to tell is to ask yourself this question. Would you sleep past your alarm clock if you didn't set one?
Okay.
If the answer is yes, it's a pretty good sign that you're not getting enough sleep.
Makes sense.
Oh.
Okay. What are some other signs?
Another sign is if you find yourself having moments of inattentiveness during the day, like if you're driving and you suddenly realize that you don't remember the last few blocks, or if you're reading and you have to reread the same paragraph over and over again,
Okay.
those could be signs that you're having microsleeps.
Microsleeps.
Yeah. So microsleeps are these very brief periods, just a few seconds long, where your brain basically goes offline.
Wow. And that can happen even when we're awake.
Yeah. It's a sign that your brain is really sleep deprived.
Okay, that's scary.
Yeah, it is. So if you're noticing those kinds of things, it's definitely a sign that you need to get more sleep.
Okay. Any other tips?
Yeah. Another thing to pay attention to is how you feel after you wake up. If you consistently feel tired and groggy, even if you slept for 7 or 8 hours, it could be a sign that your sleep quality is poor.
Okay.
And it's not just about how you feel in the morning either. If you find yourself feeling really sleepy throughout the day, that's also a sign that you might not be getting enough sleep.
Okay.
Dr. Walker said that it's normal to feel a little bit of a dip in alertness in the afternoon. But if you're feeling excessively sleepy throughout the day, it could be a problem.
Okay. And what about caffeine? If I need caffeine to get through the day, is that a sign that I'm not sleeping enough?
Well, Dr. Walker said that if you find yourself relying on caffeine before 11 a.m. just to function, it could be a sign that you're self-medicating for sleep deprivation.
Okay. That makes sense. So basically, if I'm relying on caffeine to wake up, I'm probably not getting enough sleep.
Right.
Okay. What about sleep inertia, that grogginess you feel when you first wake up?
Yeah, so sleep inertia is a normal part of waking up. But if it's excessive or if it lasts for a really long time, it could be a sign that you're not sleeping well.
Okay.
And this is especially true if you're a night owl who's forced to wake up early.
Makes sense.
because you're basically waking up at a time when your body is still biologically programmed to
Yeah.
be asleep.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of the external factors that affect sleep, things like how many hours we sleep, how consistent our sleep schedule is, and when we sleep. But I'm also curious about the internal processes that control our sleep-wake cycle.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Dr. Walker talked about two main internal forces that are at play.
Okay.
The first is our circadian rhythm, which is basically our internal 24-hour clock.
Okay.
And it's controlled by a tiny little area in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN.
SCN. Got it.
And this SCN is basically the master clock that keeps our body synchronized with the day-night cycle.
Okay.
So it tells us when to feel awake and alert and when to feel sleepy and tired.
And is this SCN the only clock in our body?
It's the master clock. But actually, almost all of the cells in our body have their own internal clocks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
But the SCN is the one that keeps everything in sync.
that's fascinating. Okay, so that's our circadian rhythm. What's the other internal force that controls our sleep?
So the other one is sleep pressure.
Sleep pressure. Okay.
And this is driven by the buildup of a chemical called adenosine in the brain.